The first gunshot didn't come until later, but if you had been standing in the Fairmont Copley Grand Ballroom that snowy December night, you would have felt the danger long before anyone bled the way the air changes before lightning, that low electric pressure against the skin. Emily Carter felt it the moment she walked in, though she mistook it for nerves. She never went to things like this. Charity galas were for people with sequin gowns and second homes, not for a 36-year-old third-grade teacher who'd spent the afternoon scraping dried glue off her classroom desks. But Rosewood Elementary was drowning. The heating had failed twice that winter. Nearly half her kids qualified for free lunch. And when an anonymous benefactor sponsored the entire district's literacy fund and strangely invited the teachers personally, Emily had squeezed herself into the one nice dress she owned, a deep blue her mother once said made her look like the sky at dusk, and taken the train downtown. She told herself she was going for the children. She did not know she was walking into a trap 15 years in the making. The ballroom glittered like the inside of a jewelry box, chandeliers dripping light onto marble, waiters gliding between tuxedos and diamonds. Emily kept to the edges, near the towering Christmas tree, and pressed her cold hands together, feeling enormous and out of place, too plain in a room built for the untouchable. Then a hush moved through the crowd like wind through wheat. Heads turned toward the entrance. Conversations died mid-sentence. The string quartet faltered, and Emily rose onto her toes to see what could silence 300 wealthy people at once. Men in black suits entered first 6 of them, moving with the coiled economy of people who had done violence and would do it again. They didn't scan the room the way security did. They owned it. And then, at their center, walking without hurry, came a man her heart recognized a full second before her mind did. The champagne flute slipped in her fingers. He was taller than she remembered, broader through the shoulders, in charcoal so dark it drank the light. The softness of the boy she'd loved had been sanded into brutal, beautiful angles. Silver threaded the black hair at his temples. A faint scar cut through one eyebrow. But the eyes, God, the eyes. Those pale grey eyes that had once looked at her across a diner table like she was the only warm thing in a cold world. Marco. The name rose in her throat and lodged there. It couldn't be. Marco Rossi, the boy who'd worked his uncle's grocery register, who'd read her poetry he pretended he hadn't written, who had vanished one October morning 15 years ago without a note, a call, a single word, leaving her on a Somerville sidewalk with a future in her hands and no one to give it to. She had cried for a year. She had built a whole life over that grave. And now he was walking through a gala like a king through a conquered city, and the crowd was afraid of him. Someone near her whispered it, low and thrilled and terrified. That's Valenti. Marco Valenti. Valenti, not Rossi, the name that made grown men lower their eyes. She'd read it in headlines about indictments that never stuck, about the boss who ruled Boston's underworld from shadows so deep no camera had ever caught his face. She had read that name 100 times and never once connected it to the gentle boy who used to trace the letters of her name on the back of her hand. The MC gestured him toward the podium. The benefactor, Emily realized, her stomach dropping through the floor. The anonymous sponsor. It's him. He funded my school. Marco stepped to the microphone. He was good at this. The room bent toward him. He spoke about the children of the city deserving more than the world had given them. His voice a low, controlled instrument. Cold, distant. A man performing warmth for people he could destroy with a phone call. And then his gaze swept the crowd, casual, sovereign, and stopped. On here. The words died in his mouth. The microphone hummed into silence. 300 people watched the most feared man in Boston go utterly still, his knuckles whitening on the podium, his carved face cracking down the middle like ice over deep water. For one suspended, impossible moment, the king vanished, and in his place stood a 21-year-old boy staring at the girl he'd left behind. Emily couldn't breathe. Across a room of diamonds and killers, their eyes locked, and 15 years collapsed into nothing. The MC touched his elbow, murmuring. Marco blinked. The mask slammed down, but too late. Emily had seen underneath it, and the thing that lived in the crack was not cold at all. It was starving. He finished in 4 clipped sentences and stepped down. And then he was moving toward her, cutting through the crowd like a blade, and every instinct Emily had built over 15 years screamed at her to run. She didn't run. She never could, from him. That was the whole tragedy of her life. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she caught the scent of him cedar and cold air, and something darker beneath, and her body remembered before her mind gave permission. Emily, her name in his mouth, was low enough that no one else could hear. It shook, very slightly, from a man she was certain had not let his voice shake in years. "Don't," the word came out broken and furious. "Don't you dare say my name like it's nothing. Like you didn't," her throat closed. "You left. You never do. You have any idea what that did to me?" Something moved behind his eyes. "I know exactly what it did to you," he said. "I know everything it did to you." The way he said it flat, absolute, certain, sent a chill up her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "How could you possibly—" "Emily," almost a plea now, his eyes cut sideways, sweeping the room, and she watched the boss reassert himself over the boy, watched him become aware of every exit, every face, every threat. "You shouldn't be here. Not this room. Not tonight." His voice dropped so low she felt it more than heard it. "Who invited you? Who told you to come?" "The school. The benefactor you sponsored." "I sponsor 40 schools. I don't send personal invitations to teachers." His jaw tightened. "Someone else did that. Someone wanted you in this room tonight. And there's only one man alive who'd know that putting you in a room with me would matter." Before she could ask what he meant, a new voice slid into the space between them, old, silky, poisonous with charm. "Marco, you didn't tell me you had friends here." Marco went rigid. Emily felt the temperature of him drop 20 degrees, felt every one of his men in the room turn like compass needles toward that voice. An old man leaned on a silver-headed cane, immaculate in black, white hair swept from a face that had once been handsome and was now simply cruel. He was smiling. His pale eyes moved from Marco to Emily and back with the leisurely pleasure of a man watching a plan bloom on schedule. "Salvatore," Marco said, not a greeting, the sound of a door being braced against a flood. "Introduce me to the lovely teacher." The old man's smile widened. "Miss Carter, isn't it?" And Emily's blood turned to ice, because she had never told this man her name. Such a devoted young woman. Such a shame she never knew why the love of her life abandoned her on a cold October morning. Marco moved the fastest thing Emily had ever seen a body do. He simply interposed, putting himself between her and the old man, and the air around him went lethal. "You will not," he said, very softly, "say another word to her." "Or what? You'll make a scene? Here?" Ferraro clucked his tongue. "You've gotten soft, Marco. 15 years I gave you to forget her, and you never did. I have your surveillance reports. Every apartment she moved into. Every man she dated and dropped." His eyes glittered. "You built her a cage of protection and never let her see the bars. Sentimental. Your father was sentimental too. Look how that ended." Emily's mind was a hurricane. Surveillance. Watch on her. 15 years of feeling watched and calling it imagination. But Marco did not launch into confession. He didn't explain, didn't unburden himself. He only put his body between her and a killer and said, in a voice made of iron, "Walk away, Salvatore, while the room is still full." "Marco," her voice was small, "what is he talking about?" He didn't turn. He couldn't afford to. "Not here," he said. "I need you to trust me for 10 minutes. After that, you can hate me forever." His hand rose an inch toward her arm, the old gesture that used to mean "stay with me," and fell before it touched her, and the restraint in that aborted motion held more feeling than an embrace. Salvatore Ferraro lifted his cane and tapped it twice against the marble. Every exit in the ballroom filled with men in black. Not Marcus men. Here's the trouble with sentiment, the old man said pleasantly, as 300 oblivious guests sipped champagne between them and death. "It makes you predictable. I didn't bring you here to embarrass you. I brought her here to end you. A man who loves nothing can't be controlled, but a man who loves her," he smiled at Emily like a grandfather at a christening, "will kneel." It happened in the space of 4 heartbeats. Marco Valenti did not kneel. He seized Emily's wrist, the old grip, once meaning stay, now meaning live, and pulled her behind an 8-foot ice sculpture of a swan as the first gunshot cracked the chandelier light open like an egg. The ballroom detonated. 300 of Boston's finest went from champagne to screaming, diamonds abandoned as bodies dove for the floor. Emily's ears filled with shattering crystal, with the flat, percussive snap of gunfire, with Marco's voice low and terribly calm against her hair. "Stay behind me. Do exactly what I say." His 6 men had moved the instant Ferraro's cane touched stone. The ballroom became a war. Emily crouched behind the melting swan with the most feared man in Boston braced over her like a shield, and understood with total clarity that he would die here before a single bullet reached her. "Marco, the guests there are innocent people, teachers." Surprise flickered across his face, as if in 15 years of ruling killers, no one had thought to worry about the innocent in front of him. As if she'd reached through the armor and touched the boy who read her poetry. "My men have the doors. Ferraro wants me, not a massacre in front of the FBI." His jaw set. The kitchen. Service corridor. Now. They ran a blur of chandelier fragments and overturned tables. Marco's hand fused to hers, his body always angling between her and the guns. A man in black stepped into their path and Marco moved through him like weather, brutal and efficient, and Emily bit down on a scream and did not let go. At the end of a stainless steel corridor, a black SUV, engine running, one of Marco's men holding the door. They spilled into the back seat. The car was moving before the door shut, tires shrieking up a service ramp into the snow, the Copley Plaza falling away in a haze of blue police lights and falling white. For a long moment neither spoke. Emily shook. Marco's arm was still around her, and she realized she was clutching his ruined suit with both fists, and that his heart, under her hands, was slamming as hard as her own. "You're bleeding," she whispered. A dark stain spread along his sleeve. "It's nothing. You're bleeding, Marco." And Marco Valenti, the lonely king 300 people had feared to name, looked down at her and said, very quietly, "You called me Marco, not Valenti." His voice cracked. I didn't think I'd ever hear that again. Emily didn't answer. She pulled her hands back into her own lap and looked out the window at the snow, and did not cry, and did not soften, because the fury underneath her fear had not gone anywhere. He had saved her life tonight. That was true. It did not erase 15 years. Not yet. Not in one car ride. The safe house was a penthouse 40 floors above the harbor, all glass and shadow. The black water spread below like spilled ink. Marco's men melted into other rooms. A doctor appeared, stitched the grays without a word, and vanished. And then Emily was alone with him, the boy she'd loved, the man she'd feared, the stranger who knew the name of every apartment she'd ever slept in. She did not go to him. She stood at the window with her arms wrapped around herself. 15 years, her voice was flat. Explain it to me. All of it. Now. So he did. Standing a careful distance behind her, watching her reflection in the glass, Marco told her about the October his father was murdered in a parking garage in the North End. About Ferraro coming to him that same night, offering him the throne with one hand and a photograph of Emily asleep in her Somerville apartment with the other. "Take his place, or I take her, and I'll make you watch." So I left. His voice was low and steady, but his hands, she saw in the glass, were shaking. I got in a car, and I became the thing he made me, because the only way to keep you alive was to make him believe I'd stopped caring whether you lived. If I'd said goodbye, he'd have known you mattered. So I gave you nothing. I let you hate me. It was the only gift I had. Emily turned around slowly. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was hard. "You decided," she said. "Emily, you decided. For me, you looked at my whole life, and you decided what I was allowed to know, and who I was allowed to love, and how much grief I was going to carry, and you never asked me, not once." Her voice rose, shaking. "Do you know what 15 years of thinking you weren't worth a goodbye does to a person? I rebuilt myself from nothing, Marco. I told myself I was too much, too plain, too soft, too easy to walk away from. I believed that. For 15 years, I believed I was the kind of woman a man could leave without a word, and the whole time it was a decision you made for me." Marco stood very still. He didn't defend himself. He didn't say, "I did it for you," though it was written all over him. He only bowed his head and took it, every word, like a man standing in the rain he deserved. I'm not saying it wasn't brave, she said, quieter now, and it cost her. I'm not saying you were wrong to be afraid. I'm saying it was mine. My life, my risk. You took the choice out of my hands and you called it love. And maybe it was love, but it was also the most alone I have ever been. Tears spilled over. You don't get to save me by erasing me. Not again. Never again. For a long time, he said nothing. The snow fell against the glass. You're right, he said at last. And that was all. Not an argument, not a justification. Just, you're right. From a man who, she suspected, had not conceded a point to anyone in 15 years. She hadn't expected that. It disarmed her more than any speech could have. I'm tired, she said finally. I want to sleep, alone. There's a room. It's yours. The door locks from the inside. A pause. Emily, whatever you decide about me, you're safe here. That has nothing to do with whether you forgive me. She went to bed angry and grieving and alive, and she did not forgive him. Forgiveness, when it came, did not come from a speech. It came from a drawer. She stayed at the safe house because the war did not stop. Ferraro's men were watching the streets, and Marco's soldiers guarded her school gates in plain clothes now. And Emily refused to abandon her third graders. So every morning a black car took her to Rosewood, and every afternoon it brought her back. The days took on a strange rhythm. She graded spelling tests by the enormous window. She learned the names of the quiet, watchful men who died a little each time they mentioned the ones they'd lost. She did not go to Marco's bed, but she stopped locking the door. On the 9th day, looking for a spare blanket in a linen closet, she found a box. It was old, water-stained at one corner, and inside it, wrapped in tissue like something holy, was a scarf. Her scarf. Green wool, hand-knit, a dropped stitch near the fringe where she'd gotten distracted watching a boy read poetry across a diner booth. She'd lost it 15 years ago. She'd torn her apartment apart looking for it and finally decided it had fallen off a bus. Underneath the scarf, a notebook, his handwriting. Not surveillance reports she'd braced for those. Instead, dates. Small, ordinary dates. She got the teaching job at Rosewood. Landlord tried to evict handled. She was sick in February. Walked to the pharmacy in the snow, followed to make sure she got home. She laughed today, on the corner of Highland, with a co-worker. First time in a long time. I stayed across the street until she went inside. Years of it. A man's whole heart, kept in the dark, in a cramped hand that grew steadier over time. And tucked in the back, brittle and yellowed, a folded scrap of paper she recognized a poem he'd copied out for her 15 years ago, and she'd assumed was lost with everything else. She sat down on the closet floor and wept. Not the angry weeping of the first night, something older and softer and more complete, because she saw it now, all of it, laid end to end, the mugger who'd run before he reached her, the job that appeared at the perfect moment, the luck that had shaped her lonely life. It had never been luck. It had been him, across the street, in the snow, loving her the only way a man in his position was permitted to love, invisibly, uselessly, endlessly. He hadn't just left her, he had stayed, the entire time, where she couldn't see. She found him at the window, watching the harbor. She didn't say anything, she just put the green scarf in his hands. Marco looked down at it, and the most feared man in Boston made a sound she would never forget, a single broken exhale, 15 years of grief leaving his body at once. I kept it, he said, uselessly. I know. She stepped closer. I read the notebook. His eyes closed. You still don't get to decide for me, she said softly. That part is forever. But her voice caught. I understand now. I'm not saying it's fixed. I'm saying I'm still here. And I'm choosing to be me. Not you choosing it for me. Me. He looked at her like a man who'd been sentenced to darkness and was watching the sun come up anyway. That's all I ever wanted, he said, for it to be your choice. When he kissed her, it was careful and aching, and 15 years in the making, and it was, for the first time in either of their lives, a thing they had both chosen with their eyes open. Outside, the snow kept falling, and 40 floors below, headlights were already turning onto the street. The war took 3 more weeks, and it cost Marco pieces of everything he'd built. Ferraro came the way old serpents do, through poison, through patience, through the men Marco trusted. A lieutenant turned, a shipment burned. An ambush in a parking garage left 2 of Marco's oldest soldiers dead, and Marco carrying Emily up 16 flights because the elevators couldn't be trusted. She stopped flinching at the blood. She started mourning the men who died guarding them. And Marco watched her grieve his soldiers and felt something he'd thought Ferraro had killed a long time ago. Hope. You could still run, he told her one night. New name, enough money to disappear like a queen. Emily didn't look up from Devon Marsh's shaky handwriting. Are you running? No. Then neither am I. She set down her pen. You fought his war alone for 15 years so I'd never have to. It's my turn to be brave for you. That's what love is, Marco. I learned it from the children. It's just deciding to be brave for someone, over and over, even when you're scared. The end came at an abandoned church, on the harbor Ferraro's church, where his father had once knelt, where Marco had been forced to swear his oath over the body of the man Ferraro had murdered. Ferraro took Emily. Of course he did. He snatched her from outside the school in daylight, the one place her protection stayed thin, because she would not stay away from her children, and sent Marco a photograph and an address. And Marco went, alone, because that was the price. But this time, Emily was not only bait. She had spent 9 days in a house full of dangerous, watchful men, and she'd done what teachers do. She'd paid attention. She'd learned the patience Marco lived by. And bound to a chair at the altar, watching Ferraro pace with his silver cane and his old revolver, she made herself small and frightened and harmless, a teacher, just a soft, useless teacher, and she watched. Marco walked in with his hands empty and his heart calm. On your knees, the old man said, exactly as he had 15 years ago. Beg the way you should have then, and maybe I'll let her live. And Marco Valenti got down on his knees on the cold stone, in front of the man who'd stolen his life, and he was not afraid because kneeling was not surrender. It was only where he needed to be. You made one mistake, Salvatore, Marco said, looking up. Oh? You taught me patience. Ferraro's smile flickered. His eyes darted, searching the high windows for the sniper he suddenly feared, the trick he was sure was coming. And in that half-second of the old man's divided attention, Emily spoke. He's not looking at the window, she said, her voice trembling exactly the way a terrified hostage's should. He's looking at the door, Mr. Ferraro, behind you. It was a lie. There was no one at the door. But it was the oldest trick in her classroom. Look where I point. Not where the danger is, and Salvatore Ferraro, 60 years a predator, and never once a fool until the one moment it mattered, turned his head toward the door. Marco moved. He came off his knees like something uncoiling, and the revolver swung back toward Emily too late, and there was no sniper on the roof. Marco had never had one. Had gambled everything on nothing but her, and the 2 men collided in the candlelight in a tangle of iron and age and fury. The gun went off once, into the vaulted ceiling. Then Marco had it, and it was over, and Salvatore Ferraro was on the floor of his own church with the boy he'd broken standing over him. Marco did not shoot. He stood there, chest heaving, the revolver in his hand, 15 years of reasons to pull the trigger written in his eyes, and he looked at Emily, bound and brave and watching him, and he lowered the gun. I'm not my father, he said quietly, and I'm not you. I don't need your blood. He tossed the revolver away, across the stone. I need you gone, out of this city, out of the life. I'll give the families what they want. But you never touch her again, and you never touch me. And this ends tonight, not with a bullet, with a deal. Because the truth Marco had learned over 15 years was the one Ferraro never had. That mercy, in their world, was not weakness. It was leverage. A dead Don becomes a martyr and starts a war. A defeated one, allowed to live in shame, becomes a warning. Freedom cost him. He was never going to be free. There was no walking away clean, no dissolving an empire over a weekend to go fix leaking faucets. That was a fantasy, and Marco had stopped believing in fantasies at 21. Instead, there was a room, and a long table, and the heads of 5 families, and 3 nights of negotiation that Emily was not allowed to see. He signed the empire away not into the light, but into other hands, the routes and accounts and soldiers divided among men who would keep the machine running without him. In exchange, he bought two things: Emily's absolute safety, sworn in blood by the Lees who honored nothing but blood, and his own exit. Ferraro, stripped of everything, was exiled to a villa in Sicily to rot in irrelevance, which for a man like him was worse than a grave. And Marco paid a price of his own, the way their world demanded. He would not speak of what happened in that room on the final night. But he came home to the safe house at dawn, walking with a cane, a plain, black one, nothing like Ferraro's silver, and he walked with it for the rest of his life, a bullet lodged too near the spine to remove. A permanent mark, the cost of peace, carried in his own body, so that no one could ever say Marco Valenti had gotten out for free. The families needed to see me pay something, was all he told her, when she wept over it. A man who walks away untouched, they'd hunt forever. A man who limps, he almost smiled, they let him limp into the sunset. It's cheaper for everyone. Emily learned not to ask more. Some prices, she came to understand, a person carries privately. They didn't move to a mansion. Emily wouldn't have it. They found a narrow blue house in Somerville, 3 blocks from the diner where a boy once read a girl poetry, and Marco, who had ruled a kingdom of killers, learned to burn a Sunday roast and sit in the back row of a 3rd-grade recital with tears in his eyes as Devon Marsh forgot his lines. He was not fully healed, and never would be. The cane stayed. So did the old habits. She'd catch him at the window sometimes, watching the street with that ancient calm, that readiness that 15 years of standing guard had carved into his bones. But now, when he watched, she stood beside him. Now his hand found hers in the dark. She wasn't a secret he protected from a distance anymore. She was a life he was building up close, and, more than that, she was a woman who had chosen it, eyes open, no one deciding for her. "What are you looking for?" she asked him once, softly, on a snowy December night not unlike the one that gave him back. Marco turned from the window, looked at her, full-figured and gentle and brave, the sky at dusk, the only warm thing in every cold world he'd ever walked through. He leaned on the plain black cane, the cost of their peace, and for the first time in his entire life, the most feared man Boston had ever known looked at the street outside and found he was watching for absolutely nothing. "Nothing," he said, and meant it. He pulled her close as the snow came down. "There's nothing out there anymore. Everything I was guarding is right here." And he closed the curtains. For the first time in 15 years, Marco closed the curtains, turned his back to the window, and let himself simply be a man in a warm house leaning on a cane he'd earned, holding the woman he'd loved across a lifetime of shadow, who had forgiven him not because he'd saved her, but because, in the end, he'd finally let her save herself. Finally, in the light. The end